Story 1. COVID lit something in me, and I've been gassed up ever since. I started mowing lawns out of the trunk of my '03 Accord. Then I learned how to climb and properly remove trees. I have a big old truck and trailer and a ton of equipment now. I was an alcoholic server/bartender before and super depressed. 2 of my teenage kids have moved in with me, and I'm in the best shape of my life. Story 2. The bizarre determinations on who could be considered an essential worker. My son was considered an essential worker. He was a teenager working his first job in fast food. Story 3. I was a student nurse at the time, and we were asked to volunteer to support the qualified nurses. It was terrifying and absolute hell. Story 4. Weird. Lots of anxiety, but it was also kind of peaceful. I count myself very lucky that I had a stable job that I could do from home and that I owned a house with a nice outdoor space. Story 5. I will be surprised if anyone asks. When it did strike, my brother, who studied infectious diseases while in college, was astonished he had never thought to ask our 4 grandparents about the Spanish flu. They were all young adults when it hit. Story 6. My best friend started wearing masks, carrying hand sanitizers, and telling everyone that when the vaccine becomes available, she is first in line. Right before she could get the vaccine, she got COVID-19, ended up in the intensive care unit where she was isolated for 6 weeks, and no one could visit her at the hospital. Then, she was moved to another part of the hospital where she died. The last phone call we had, she told me she can't stand the hospital because the food sucks here. She couldn't taste the food. Rest in peace, Sully. Everyone loved you, and we all miss you. Story 7. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the cleanest of times, it was the dirtiest of times. It was the quietest of times, it was the loudest of times. It was the most fun of times, it was the most boring of times. Story 8. There is no difference for me. Work was somehow considered essential. We make cabinet drawers, and I think we had maybe 3 to 4 orders for the COVID tents during the lockdown. It took 1 day of work to be considered essential for the whole lockdown. I am an introvert and a gamer, and I just bought my house, so I didn't really need to go anywhere. Okay, one difference. Walmart closing at 8 p.m. meant I couldn't go grocery shopping after work anymore. Story 9. It was pretty awful. I was working 72 to 80 hours a week in a nursing home COVID unit. I normally worked in a critical access emergency room as a travel nurse, but the medical world was falling apart, and I went where the most desperate need for help was. I would take 1 day off a week to do my laundry in the hotel where I was staying and do Walmart pickup for my groceries and supplies. I didn't go home. I didn't want any of my family or friends to possibly get this virus that had already killed and disabled so many. I did that for several months. So many died, alone, without their loved ones. We were so busy trying to care for the sick, but I always had guilt when someone died without staff there. Crushed my soul. Then I too became sick with COVID. I laid quietly in my hotel room until I knew I had to go to the ER. They gave me a liter of 4 fluid and said if I got any worse, to come back. The ER doctor pulled me aside as I was leaving and told me I needed to get home and get to a bigger hospital. I tried. It took me 2 days to pack up my gear, and I almost remember driving home. I had my daughter set up a quarantine space in our house. It was amazing. The day after I got home, I was admitted to the hospital for 12 days in respiratory failure related to COVID pneumonia infection. I don't know how I didn't die. That was sheer will and knowing that my daughter still needed me and I didn't have enough life insurance, and I didn't have my house and other issues in the right arrangement. They made my 23-year-old son my medical durable power of attorney. I didn't die as expected, but instead spent 10 months at home trying to recover. I had taken a hard neuro hit as well as hard respiratory damage from COVID. For 3 months, I couldn't handle light of any sort, noise had to be minimal, and all food tasted wrong. I couldn't say the words for what I was trying to say. I didn't know if it would ever get better. Slowly it did. I never got to go back to ER nursing. I did find hospice nursing. It fixed my heart and gave my soul hope that we can do better if another pandemic ever comes around. I now have things set up for my family in case of my death. I don't get to do anything overly stressful or crazy either. My mind is a little darker now, and if I think too hard on it, I like humans in power a little less and people unwilling to protect themselves to protect others even less than that. Lockdown was awful for some of us, but it was absolutely necessary, and we hopefully learned better ways to deal with it when it comes again. And it will come again. Story 10. It is hard to lose a family member and not even be able to have a funeral. Depressed about being locked up. Story 11. It's really depressing. I don't want to say that I wasted up to 4 years of my life because I didn't, but I felt not even real. I think I dissociated the whole thing. Story 12. Would not know. I worked in the hospital morgue for the whole lockdown. I hoped not to catch the incurable blood clotting disease that killed many of my clients for $19 an hour. I was called a hero and an essential worker while I could not afford to buy a house. Story 13. Like some weird collective psychosis. Like we collectively all lost our sanity for a while, but with good reason. The 2020 lockdown was a weirdly magical time that was quiet and peaceful, but filled with anxiety. The early 2021 lockdown was an absolute nightmare of depression and a slowly decreasing grip on reality. I did a lot of walking. Story 14. In the beginning for Canada, there was a type of cooperation that was incredible. After a few months, invasive social media crept in and changed everything. People went from communal to factional in the span of a few months. Story 15. I would tell them about how the mayor of Chicago told people if they left their house, they would be jailed, but then she went and got a haircut. Story 16. I was an essential worker. It was the year I understood the depth of how little Americans care about each other. Story 17. It was hell. I was a retail manager for Walmart. No lockdown, no free unemployment money, no government help. Constantly understaffed, overworked, and exhausted. We were essential but never got any benefit or recognition. We were physically accosted by people who didn't want to wear masks, but it was a state OSHA ordinance that they were kicked out. We got no choice but got demanded. We got yelled at for toilet paper and other essentials that were just gone. No suppliers had anything, and customer frustrations were taken out on the retail management. So yeah, it was grand. Story 18. It was pretty much a test run of how fast we will turn and completely destroy each other if faced with an actual disaster. By all accounts, this is a small change in the quality of life. When the next one hits, it will be even worse. Story 19. I'm not sure I would be able to answer. The days were all so similar. My brain has condensed my memories down so that it feels like it was a week or two. I remember empty grocery shelves, my kids doing school work on laptops in our living room, and my husband growing his hair out. I got gas for 25 cents a gallon at one point, but had nowhere to go. Our dog had cancer, so I was grateful that we were all home with him during his last months. Story 20. Strange. It was an extended holiday for many. Meanwhile, a huge chunk of the general population got labeled as essential workers, and they had to carry on as usual. I think COVID-19 showed us which jobs were genuinely essential to keep society afloat. Story 21. I'm a retail pharmacist who saw it all play out in real time in a community of mixed socio-economic backgrounds. It's really quite simple. Once not required to wear masks, most of those who chose to continue to do so were perfectly healthy at the register, with the staff rarely hearing a single cough or any other symptom of even a minor viral illness. Unfortunately, once it was no longer required to wear masks, the sickest patients adamantly chose not to. I love being an American with the many freedoms we enjoy as much as anyone else. But the amount of times I could feel the momentum of someone's cough hit my own face while counseling them on their medication was astounding. I just know why we stayed a mess as long as we did. Lack of common sense and human decency. Story 22. We all claimed things would be different after we got out of it. We would value health, community, and connection. Then the corporations got worse. Story 23. The happiest 10 months of my life. I got paid to go do outdoor fun stuff like crabbing, fishing, hunting, hiking, picnics, and so on. Story 24. It was a difficult year on a social level, but on an environmental level, it was a rare opportunity to observe what happened to the planet when humans stopped, and there was a better quality of environment. Story 25. It was quiet for the most part. With everyone being home, there was an uptick of people making banana bread, and bread yeast was hard to come by. Story 26. a time for rebirth and growth. But before that happened, I was drinking more than 20 a day and actively ruining my life. 2 years sober now. Story 27. Having like a solid 15 friends all gaming on Discord and chilling like we did in high school was pretty amazing. I had an essential job, so I didn't notice anything. Wearing a mask everywhere, with everyone having different rules that made no sense, sucked. Story 28. I will never forget it. Being in healthcare, I was on the front lines every day, stressed, overworked, and hoping I didn't get COVID-19. Story 29. I almost feel guilty for how amazing lockdown was for us. My marriage was struggling because we had no time to work through issues and enjoy each other's company. We ended up doing Zoom counseling for a couple of weeks, and it was exactly what we needed to rekindle everything. We ended up having a baby in 2021, and I am pregnant again now, and there is just no way that would have happened without lockdown. We already had 2 kids, and we were just super busy, overburdened, and disconnected. COVID-19 was a godsend for us. We did not personally know anyone who got sick. Our kids thrived. We fixed up our home and our garden. I wish we could live it all over again just once more, but without the loss of lives and hardships of others. Story 30. I lived in Manhattan for most of it. The lockdown affected me deeply. It's the reason I moved to the West Coast. I spent most days waiting for things to improve, but every day brought more bad news. Times Square was devoid of human presence, just billboards advertising to nobody. There were barely any people riding the subways. A triage unit was set up in Central Park because the hospitals were overflowing. There were sirens and silence. Story 31. You wouldn't believe the kind of crazy that crawled out of the woodwork, and all they did was be obstinate, whiny, and difficult because they had to hold themselves accountable to their fellow man. Story 32. What lockdown? I was a retail worker in a large national chain that deals in auto parts and accessories. I was deemed essential to the economy because my store serviced the local USPS fleet, among others. There was never any lockdown in my perspective. There was only a piecemeal approach to how any given store managed their foot traffic with respect to 6-foot distancing, and I couldn't go get groceries at 2 a.m. if I couldn't sleep. Lockdown my ass. If the authoritarian power required to actually enforce a lockdown was ever present, it was never used to actually enforce a lockdown. Story 33. I won't be bothering with trivial things like socializing with people, and I will let my artificial intelligence assistant handle that sort of thing because I'll be too busy transporting affluent individuals in an electric rickshaw taxi for water credits. Story 34. It was scary at first, but then it made some of us realize how important taking time for yourself really is, and not to be slaves to some unsatisfactory workplace. Story 35. The worst, dumbest time in human history was when we witnessed how easily and quickly people can be consumed by fear, revealing how not nice we all really are. Story 36. Every day blended into the next, basically, and we were forced to stay indoors since the parks and beaches were even closed. Story 37. Amazing. I got promoted to security manager at a Fortune 500 company the weekend before lockdown. When lockdown occurred, it was the best. I was basically alone most of the time, making manager money while doing the least amount of work I think I've ever done in my life. No traffic on the way to work. I loved COVID other than the aspect of people dying. Story 38. I cannot proceed with this request. Story 39. Awesome. Got to start working remotely, and even now, I only have to go into the office twice a week. I went from a tank of gas a week to 1 tank every 2 weeks, plus the savings of having access to my kitchen for lunch. No random people knocking on my door to sell me magazines or God. Plus, I got to laugh at all the people dependent on growing and killing trees to wipe their butts since we had had a bidet for 5 years at that point. Story 40. Phase 1 was fear. This new, novel virus was killing folks at an alarming rate. Hospitals were breaking. Nobody knew much but thought they knew a lot. Phase 2 saw people trying to recalibrate to a new reality. Folks who lost jobs had gotten unemployment insurance by now, and working folks were adjusting to the realities of lockdown, reacquainting with the outdoors, leaning into at-home pursuits, and binge-watching stuff like Tiger King. Phase 3 was the start of a larger push to move past it. Some folks rebelled against masks, Business owners and certain governments started pretending that we were past the worst because of the economic implications. Phase 4 was greed. Prices started skyrocketing for reasons that people disagree on. A good portion of folks had pent-up spending and started acquiring things. Some jobs began to pay more. Phase 5 was discontent. Vaccines lifted the veil for most. Businesses started to push back on increased pay and work from home. Prices continued to rise without obvious direct inputs, solely out of a desire for profit. Post-COVID is mostly a return to normal. Prices are still elevated, and business is gaining the upper hand against workers. The largest takeaway is that we had a chance to fundamentally alter the social fabric and blew it.